We will now complete a short experiment. Please try to remember the following list of words without writing them down. Bed, rest, awake, tired, dream, wake, snooze, blanket, doze, slumber, snore, nap, peace, yawn, drowsy. Please take a moment to recall the words that you just heard. Now take a moment to examine this list. Which of these words did you just hear? These are the words that were just read to you a moment ago. But do you remember this one? You may already be familiar with this experiment. This is the Deese, Roediger, McDermott paradigm, otherwise known as the DRM for short. This well-known test is used to study false memory in humans using word list recall and recognition. Participants are read a list of words and asked to recall as many as possible. Within each list is a critical lore, or a word associated with all the others, but not actually spoken to the participant. Participants are then given a recognition test. They are presented with the previously stated words, 30 filler words, and the critical lore word associated with the list. They are then asked whether or not they remembered seeing those words. Participants will often recall and recognize critical lores as often as presented words. In the previously presented word list, participants will often recall and recognize the word sleep, even though it is not read to them in the original list. This paradigm is widely used today in false memory research in cognitive psychology. But how did it come to be? The article associated with the DRM paradigm is Creating False Memories, Remembering Words Not Presented in Lists, by Henry Roediger III and Kathleen McDermott in 1995. But as you may notice, Deese is not listed as an author on this publication. The DRM was actually pioneered by James Deese 36 years prior, in 1959, in an article titled, On the Prediction of Occurrence of Particular Verbal Intrusions in Immediate Recall. Deese was a professor at Johns Hopkins University from 1948 until 1972, in which time he became interested in psycholinguistics. One of his interests included how people learned words. In 1954, Deese published a paper with George Hardiman Jr. examining word learning, specifically how learning certain word associations after others may affect memory for previously learned words. Later, in 1957, Deese published a paper with Roger Kaufman examining serial effects in recall of word lists. In this study, participants were presented with either a random word list or a passage from the current World Almanac. Deese and Kaufman found that the participants recalled words differently based on the sequence in which they were learned. In both his 1954 and 1957 experiments, Deese found intrusions, or words that were not presented to the participants, that he believed were from other word lists. In his 1959 study, Deese sought to understand why, when remembering a list of previously learned words, some students consistently recalled words that were not listed. He presented participants with 36 lists of 12 words each in order to examine these intrusion words. Specifically, Deese wanted to see if this word interference came from other word lists or from associations to other words. He found that these associated words were incorrectly recalled up to 40% of the time, depending on the word list used. 30 years after this publication, Deese partially retired from academia in 1990, but continued to write as a professor emeritus at the University of Virginia until his death in 1999. Little attention was given to Deese's 1959 experiment until around this time in the early 1990s. Henry Roediger III took interest and sought to replicate Deese's 1959 experiment while at Rice University. Roediger offered this project to his PhD student at the time, Kathleen McDermott, as part of her dissertation research. Roediger and McDermott replicated Deese's findings using his 6 most successful word lists. The two also completed a follow-up study that exercised more experimental control, creating additional word lists with 15 items and implementing a remember no judgment task. This additional study also implemented a recognition task in which words were presented to the participants. If participants indicated that they had heard a word previously, they were then asked if they were able to mentally relive the experiment. This was known as a remember judgment. Or if it was just familiar, this was categorized as a no judgment. This second experiment saw an increase in recall of critical lore words, as well as 72% of recognized lores being categorized as remembered events. This replication of Deese's work, as well as the additional study by Roediger and McDermott, provided evidence for the robustness of this effect. This fact, coupled with the availability of the word lists in the 1995 paper, helped make the DRM paradigm become the popular research tool that it is today.